Good evening, and this is Robert Phoenix. You're listening to Sunday Far. I am your host. I hope everybody is having a good weekend. Things are heating up in the world today, as we know it. Let's see, on the geopolitical front, Iran has crossed over into the Iraqi border. This after Ahmadinejad's grandstand speech at the UN. Basically defying the United States, calling the United States out on 9/11, and saying that it was at the center of 9/11 and doing what it did to protect Israeli interests in the Middle East. While I would agree that Ahmadinejad has touched on a nerve and is extracting a part of the truth, it is only part of the truth. And whenever a part of the truth gets floated around in the mainstream, it is almost as bad as a non-truth. So now we have Ahmadinejad as the bad guy, the controlled bad guy, by the way. He was part of the team that went in and abducted the American consulate and people at the American embassy during the reign of the Shah, which was orchestrated theoretically by the Shah of Iran, by the Ayatollah Khomeini. And we know, at least I know, and perhaps some of you know, that the Ayatollah Khomeini was an intelligence asset that was hanging out in France, and the coup was a staged, organized military coup from the outside in, with a few key members on the inside, one of which was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And as a result, he's been in power pretty much ever since the exodus from this plane of existence of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and running Iran with an ironclad fist and shaking it at the rest of the world. Meanwhile, the Israelis are now free to make more settlements, and they celebrated in a big time at midnight tonight with balloons and the whole 9 yards. And so we've got that happening now. They're free to crank it up because nobody's going to say no to more settlements. And Ahmadinejad has crossed over into Iraq and doing some border skirmishing there. So it's all looking pretty rosy over in the Middle East. It's prime. You know, we're coming up on October. Whenever October rolls around, we're talking about October Surprise. And October Surprise looks like it's a big heaping Middle Eastern salad, Middle Eastern shit salad. And we might find ourselves yet entrenched in more conflict there. And I don't want to be a doomsayer, though I do want to bring it up, and it is important that we talk about these things, because when we talk about these subjects, we bring them to light. And when we bring things to light, we shine the light of truth on them, no matter how small we may think our influence is. It is much greater than we understand. So even a glimmer of light and a glimmer of truth to uncover and look at, examine, and expose what might be happening can actually go a long ways towards keeping something from happening. And this has been my contention for a long time now. It is the best line of defense that we have against tyranny, cruelty, financial and military exploitation upon our freedoms and our psyches. So tonight's guest is pretty interesting. His name is Stephen Gray, and it's rare when somebody comes to me and says, "I want to be on your show." I usually have to go out and find the person to spend 30, 60, 90 minutes to talk with me, and it's not always that hard. Every now and then I get a no, but most times people want to come on here and talk. And Stephen heard the interview that I did with Dale Pendle, rather, and so Stephen liked what he heard. And Stephen is kind of in the same field as Dale. He is an ethno-botanist and an explorer of altered states of consciousness. And Stephen has a book out. It's called Return to Sacred World, and it is a toolkit for the emergent reality, a spiritual toolkit for the emergent reality. And we're going to talk to Stephen tonight about how entheogens and sacred plant medicine can really help accelerate us into a new paradigm, in a new form of relating to not just one another, but the planet and the cosmos on a very conscious level. We're going to talk about ancient traditions and the shamanic way. This is an area of study and practice that I have long been interested in ever since my teens, and feel that there's a huge amount of potential that is in the inherent wisdom of plant medicine. So we're going to talk to Stephen about his book, his thoughts, and we're going to talk to him about how he sees a world in the future that is informed, by a loving and harmonious relationship with sacred plant medicine. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play operator. Let's see what we got here. My show's been marked a favorite. We like that. Let's see. Sometimes I have to check here. Sometimes people tell me if my volume is too low, or so it looks like we're okay here. I'm using another computer tonight, by the way. I'm using a computer. My computer's on the fritz. It has been for a while, and my backup computers are not cooperating. So let's dial out here and let's get our new friend Stephen Gray on the show, and he promised that he would keep people away from his telephone, and let's see if he's been able to keep them, in fact, far enough away so we can talk to him. Here we go.
Hello.
Stephen?
Yes, is that Robert?
Yeah, it is. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. You sound a little bit like you're on a speakerphone, but I can hear you.
Okay, because I kind of am, unfortunately. I've had to relocate my position. As I told you a little bit earlier, my computer is kind of funky, so I'm
no worries.
I'm at somebody else's house here. So let me just do one thing, see if I can kind of clean up the sound a little bit. I got this, and let me see my output. Let me go to my output here. Output volume, balance left and right, line out, internal microphone. I'm going to turn this up just a little bit, and we'll go from there. Is that any better by any chance?
No, it hasn't changed, but I can hear you, so it's all right.
Okay, good enough. So
yeah, as long as you don't fade off or get further away than you are.
Okay. Well, I tried. So I did my best to give our audience here kind of an understanding about you, just a little bit, brief. But I think it'd be quite helpful for people to get more of a sense of who you are. I talked a little bit about the book and just kind of touched on the outline of the book. But let's talk about you and your history a little bit and how you came to this wonderful world of sacred plant medicine. And eventually, where I want to go with this, and I think you probably are into the idea, is to see how the sacred plants can really help shape the world that we're living in and the world that theoretically we'll inhabit, especially on a positive level. So let's take a trip back in time into the life of Stephen Gray, and let's find out where your interest in this material in this world came from and how it evolved.
Sure, no problem. Are we on the air now?
Yes, we're live.
All righty. Okay, first of all, I hope you don't mind if I make a slight correction to the text by which you introduced me on the website page.
Sure, not a problem.
Sure, you referred to me as an ethno-botanist, and except in some very sort of unofficial amateur way, I wouldn't call myself an ethno-botanist. I certainly have no papers to claim that I'm such.
Okay.
Excuse me. The way I think of myself is a student, a teacher, a writer, and a musician primarily, and a researcher. And in answer to your question, I would go back to I'll tell you my age right off the bat. I'm 61, so that puts me in a historical context. And so in that sense, I'm what you might call a child of the 60s, and was very passionately interested in the ideas which were exploding at the time in the late 60s and early 70s. And like many people of my generation, was interested in the what we called the psychedelics at the time. Excuse me. Feel free to interrupt and ask questions at any point as I ramble on here. I've also always had an interest in spirituality, and that goes back to that time as well. So the link between those two was evident to me fairly early on and of interest to me, although I will confess that, like also many of my generation, I completely abused some of these plants at the time. There was one particular little source of information which caught me fairly quickly, though, was a little book. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Robert, by a guy named Thaddeus Golas, called The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment.
Absolutely, yeah. I was actually playing with somebody the other day, and I was kidding them and saying that I was going to work on a new version of that called Slouching on the Way to Enlightenment. Yeah.
Well, I hope that has more positive connotations than slouching toward Bethlehem has.
I think so. I was playing with that as well. So yeah. It's a neat little book.
Yeah, it was a great book, actually. I still have a copy of it, and it made it really clear that there was this possibility of opening up, letting go of some of the conditioning and dissolving the ego, opening the heart through the use of this. In that particular book, he was referring to LSD, but it kind of twigged me, and I actually worked with that book a little bit in the way that I used it a couple of times back in the day. And then just to kind of continue on with my own biography, so to speak, I got quite involved. I got very involved in Tibetan Buddhism starting in the mid to late 70s. And I was my teacher was Chogyam Trungpa, and I was the whole community was not into the psychedelics at all.
Right.
Even cannabis was sort of frowned upon at the time. So I left those things for a while. And skip ahead to the late 80s. I was living in Los Angeles. Had not really done anything like that for quite a while, but always had an interest in native teachings, indigenous teachings. And when I was in Los Angeles, there was a cover article with a giant head-to-toe photograph of a certain fellow by the name of Terence McKenna on the LA Weekly. And I was fascinated by what he had to say and what they said in the article, and went up to a talk that he was giving in Ojai. And this twigged a whole connection for me, because having left the psychedelics behind earlier on, it never had left me as a possibility of connecting up the two meaning spiritual practice and the use of psychedelics.
Right.
But didn't see a way forward with that until McKenna. And then McKenna sort of opened that whole thing up again with his discussion of continuing the discussion of the dissolving of the ego issue, but connecting it into indigenous teachings. And so that got me reinterested in all that. I worked with psilocybin a little bit on my own during that time, with I would say mixed successes. And at a certain point, came upon the idea that it would be good to work in a context. McKenna's Terence's ex-wife, Kathleen Kat Harrison. She's an excellent spokesperson, by the way, for these things. And she said something like, if you want to work with these things, I strongly recommend you learn from the indigenous people. The thing is that these people have been using these medicines for thousands of years, and they know how to use them. So that led me over a period of the next few years to a connection, which I won't go into the detail of, but the Native American Church. And for the last 7 years, that's been my main practice. I still meditate. Excuse me. But the peyote medicine of the Native American Church prayer ceremonies, for me, came at the perfect time as a way to connect spiritual practice and the use of the plants in a very efficacious, powerful way. During that time also, it was actually before I got involved with the Native American Church, I had one experience with ayahuasca in a ceremony led by an American who'd been trained in Peru, and had quite a remarkable experience doing that. And so I always had that one in the back of my mind. And lately I've connected with some people again up in this corner of the world. I live in Vancouver, so up in the Northwest here, there are a number of people who are being trained and have been trained in Peru and such areas, who are leading ceremonies, and there's quite a strong movement, so to speak, going on. And I've now participated in about 10 ayahuasca ceremonies as well. So other than that, writing the book. When I was involved with Buddhism, I was a meditation instructor and sometime teacher and such like. And the book is coming out in November from O Books in England. It's called Returning to Sacred World, a Spiritual Toolkit for the Emerging Reality. And I could talk about that, or you could ask me questions, however you want to do that.
Yeah, so let's, I'm curious to get your take on the sort of the different psychic spaces that you've encountered with peyote versus ayahuasca, and where there may be some commonality and where there may be some distinct differences, and
Sure.
if you can talk about them from your own sort of personal narrative and what you've learned from both of those realms.
Definitely, thank you. By the way, just so I know sort of how to sort of have a beginning, middle, and end to all this, how long do we have in this conversation?
We have we can be on here for as long as 2 hours, or
okay. Well, we'll just ramble freely then.
Whenever we feel like it. So we've got 2 hours as our frame.
Okay. Well, as I say, feel free to interrupt at any time.
Sure.
The first thing that strikes me in your question is the commonality between the two. And this comes back to Kat Harrison's comments about learning from the indigenous people. I think I had this actually put this quote in my book, and I can't remember the wording of it right now, but it's something like, they understand how these plants are actually medicines, and we in these cultures don't understand that, right? So the primary commonality between ayahuasca and peyote and psilocybin and Salvia divinorum, and a few others, similar plants, is that there's a spirit within the plant.
Yes.
And when it's done right, and that is a really loaded word right there, the word right, or, in the most, successful circumstances, then there's the possibility of contacting that spirit at whatever level. Whether it be sort of subtle intuitions, and I'll be completely honest here. I'm not a master of these plants. I work with people in the Native American Church that have been doing this since they were born, or for 30 or 40 years. Ken Littlefish, for example, is a roadman, ceremony leader of the Native American Church, who has he's in his early 60s, been doing it since he was 19. And I think he's been a roadman for about 30 years. In the ceremonies, Ken says things like, he'll look around the room and he say, relatives, I want you to understand something. When I run these meetings, the spirit talks to me and tells me what to do in this meeting. And I say, when I say that, he says, when I say that, I mean it literally. The spirit talks to me. I have a conversation with the spirit, and the spirit says, well, see that person over there, Ken? You need to do that with this person over here, right? Similarly with Ronan Niue, who I've been working with, one of these non-native ayahuasca or ayahuasqueros, ayahuasca shamans, who's working in the Northwest up here. He says the same thing. He's being trained by Guillermo Aravelo in Peru. Ronan says the same thing, that we're talking about a plant spirit that you can connect with directly, and that will actually guide you through the ceremonies. And the traditional ayahuasqueros will say very much the same thing, as far as I know anyway. I went to the 4th annual shamanism conference in Iquitos, Peru 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I did 2 ceremonies with a fellow named Percy Garcia, who I really liked. And he says he has 8 spirit doctors. You probably know yourself, and maybe a number of your listeners also know that the traditional training for the ayahuasqueros is that they do a lot of what they call dietas, plant diets. You familiar with that?
No. Let's go with it. Let's find out more about it.
Well, the proper training, and remind me to come back to this issue of the proper training, because it's a really important issue for me. as we move forward with these plant medicines into the culture, into a wider culture, into a more important role in the culture. But I'll go back to Percy for a minute here. And the training for ayahuasca arrows, when it's done properly, as I understand it, I've read quite a bit about this. There's a long, rigorous training involved, and a significant part of that training is that the ayahuasca shaman in training will work with a number of different plants, some of which may be psychoactive and some of which may not be, but according to those people, all have a spirit. And so they work with them in a very, very deep way by going off into the jungle. For example, this would be a typical scenario. Might go off for 2 weeks, a month, or even longer, alone. They go on to a very, very simple diet, no salt, no sugar, no alcohol, no sexual contact, and probably no contact with anybody really, except maybe once in a while with their own mentor. And they work with a particular plant, and it may be by chewing it, eating it, making tea out of it, smoking it, and the aim is for them to make a relationship with the spirit of that plant, so that that plant will then be an ally for that person in his healing work for the rest of his life. And the contact comes in sometimes apparently in direct waking experience, sometimes through dreams. And so Percy Garcia said that he had 8 spirit doctors that he had done plant dietas with over in his youth. And he said at the beginning of every ceremony, he calls upon those spirit doctors and he thanks them. I'm almost quoting him here. He thanks them and then he invites them into the ceremony. And he said they guide him in his work with the group. In the ayahuasca ceremony, this is one difference between the native, not so much the medicine itself, but a difference between the Native American church ritual and the ayahuasca ritual in the shamanic context, is that the shaman or ayahuasquero does all the singing, makes all the music in ayahuasca ceremonies. This is not the ayahuasca church we're talking about here. There's several of those, and I think the music scenario is quite different there. I've never been to one of those meetings. But in the traditional South American, Amazonian shamanic approach to working with ayahuasca, the ayahuasca ceremony leader does the music. And Percy said that his spirit doctors guide him with the music. And when I did the ceremony with Percy, or I did 2 with him actually, I really felt that was the case. In the first one, he created, or something between me, the medicine, Percy, the music, and the spirit doctors, created an incredibly peaceful space. So that I felt when the medicine came on, when I entered into the space of the medicine, I was already into this really powerful, peaceful space, which allowed me to work really strongly with the medicine guides or spirits or whatever. In the Native American church, there's a different focus. I'm not sure where exactly we should go with this. There's a whole bunch of things that are different, but the ritual itself is quite different. The way I see the difference, in some respects, both between the medicines and the ritual context, is that in ayahuasca ceremonies, and the way that we have encountered them, is it's primarily about your own inner work, right? For example, I think Percy Garcia's ceremonies were fairly typical. They do them in darkness. Once the ceremony gets going and everyone's drank the medicine, they turn off the lights or put out the candles or whatever, and you're alone, and it's you and the medicine for the next 3 to 5 hours, right? Guided hopefully by the music, and that does have a big effect on it. I think that's a really important part of it for sure. In the Native American church, it's not dark. It's in a teepee. The ceremony is held in a teepee with a fire going throughout the night, so the fire provides light. And they're prayer ceremonies. Most meetings are called because somebody asks for a meeting. That person then becomes called the sponsor of the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of the meeting, the sponsor tells the group why they asked for the meeting, and it can be anything from something pretty heavy. There's a meeting coming up this weekend down in that area that I go to in Washington State, which is for a fellow who has cancer. So it's a healing meeting. Some meetings are like a baptism, a birthday, a wedding anniversary. Some of them are a gratitude meeting. So it can be anything from a very lighthearted kind of celebration to a very intense healing situation. But the focus of the meeting is that prayer, the prayer for the sponsor's request, and that's called the main prayer. And then the medicine goes around. Everybody eats the medicine. And the bulk, I would say, more time spent than anything else singing the prayer songs, and everybody sings. What they do is they have instruments that go around. They have a water drum, a staff, a sage stick, and a gourd shaker, which are passed from person to person. And anyone who knows songs will sing a set of 4 of these prayer songs. Mm-hmm. Everyone else in the room is free to accompany them in singing or not. Sometimes the person ends up singing alone, and sometimes everybody or however many people know the song will join in. But they're praying for the purpose set by the sponsor. So that's a very big difference. It's not that people never go inward. And in fact, it's on some level, it's very much about your own spiritual work, but it almost kind of happens parallel to the prayer somehow. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but your eyes are open most of the time. And again, you can close your eyes, but people tend to keep their eyes open most of the time because there's things going on. There are things going on in the teepee, and you usually want to be aware of the energies that are moving about. It's often suggested you keep your eyes on the fire. One of the old roadmen said, "Watch the fire, relatives. It has things to teach you. It has things to show you." So that's one, I would say, fairly significant, outward difference between the 2 medicines and the 2 rituals.
Right. And what about like psychic terrain? I mean, I know that I've never participated in an ayahuasca ceremony, although I have experienced peyote, not in the context of the Native American Church though.
Right.
But from what I've been able to ascertain from a number of people that have experienced ayahuasca, one of the big symbols and images that crops up from throughout most of these journeys is that of the serpent. And I wanted to talk to you about that in terms of your own experience, and if the serpent actually shows up in the peyote ceremony as well.
Oh, let's see now. What can we say about that? Yes, I'm aware of that, and I'm well informed, I would say, I guess, about the serpentine imagery. By the way, it's not exclusive to ayahuasca. I've done psilocybin ceremonies, just private ones or with a friend, but done in a ceremonial way, where I've seen that kind of movement several times. It seemed to be visuals that are serpentine in nature. Right. And not that much different from ayahuasca ceremonies, experiences in some respect in that regard. Both those 2 medicines are tryptamines, so they're kind of in the same class. Peyote is actually a different class of medicine altogether in some respects. Although I think throughout the conversation it's important to keep in mind the larger overriding picture, which is that they are teaching, healing spirits. Right. That's the most important thing on some level. On the experiential level of how they manifest, there are some significant differences which fall into that sort of larger umbrella. I would say, yeah. So ayahuasca and serpentine imagery. I've had some visual. Ayahuasca is a really fascinating medicine. It's. I would say. I would call it a genius, to be honest. It will work with you and help you with what you need. Ronan Niwe, the guy I've been working with up here, he really likes people to be very clear about their intentions.
Yeah.
Wants people to express to themselves and sometimes to the group what their intentions are, and go in with, as he put it, with intention but not expectation, because this medicine will. It's extremely intelligent, and it's not, how would you put it? It doesn't think in left brain terms, is one way I would think about it. It's more of an artist. It's more of a poet. It will respond to your request if it's clear, but not in some obvious linear kind of left brain way, right?
Right.
If that's for me, I'm not here.
No.
Anyway.
Anyway, this is what happens when you're in another zone.
No problem.
This
go ahead.
is interesting. The spirit of ayahuasca and the serpent and this kind of artistic experience with it. It's fascinating. How would you describe peyote? Is peyote as poetic, or is peyote more sort of instructive and I wouldn't say linear, but is it more for just kind of a more linear narrative, I guess, than ayahuasca? Is that would you make that distinction between the two?
Well, would you mind if I go back to the ayahuasca for a minute longer?
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Just because I felt like I needed to say a little bit more about that, how that works. Ayahuasca has a bottomless kit bag of the ways that it can show you things. And it can be, you can have a highly visual experience, you can have no visuals whatsoever, you can have an incredibly rough ride, which sometimes people who've worked with it a lot say is actually oftentimes the ones that turn out to be the most instructive, the most helpful in the longer term.
Right.
You can have an experience of total bliss. There's really I don't think there's really any limit to what can happen in the ayahuasca experience. It's often very visual. That's my experience of it. Although there's levels of that too. I haven't had any experiences where I actually have seen a palpable, kind of almost tangible presence in front of me where I thought, this is as real as, what would happen if I turned to the person and looked at the person beside me, right?
Right.
But I have heard other people say that they have had that experience. So I know that's the case. Peyote, first of all, it's a lot more subtle. I imagine you could have the kinds of intensity that you have with ayahuasca, but the way ayahuasca is done in the ceremonies, the shamanic ceremonies, it almost always is very, very intense, and often quite visual. Really takes you for a ride. And as I say, you're going inward. Your eyes are closed. It's dark in the room. It's silent. It's a very very inner kind of experience that way. The peyote medicine, it's really hard to describe to people who haven't had the experience because it's both extremely powerful and very subtle at the same time. Ken Littlefish, who I mentioned earlier in the conversation, his wife Nancy, who's also been working with that medicine for many years, said the medicine spoke to her one night and said, "I am a gentle way for you to come home." So peyote can seem more gentle. It can certainly seem a lot more subtle, and certainly in the quantities that it's taken in the ceremonies for the most part. It's not like in I've seen in ayahuasca ceremonies people, they can't even move sometimes, right?
Yeah.
they're vomiting all over the place, or they're dizzy, or they can't make it to the bathroom without help or whatever.
Right.
Peyote ceremonies, you're up, you're on your knees, or you're sitting cross-legged, you're upright all night. You're paying attention to what's going on most of the time. You're praying for the sponsor's request, and I can say more about that prayer thing later. But the medicine leaves you completely, how would I put it? I was going to say sober, but sober in the sense that you have all your faculties completely accessible to you. You can walk around, you can think quickly if you have to do something,
Right.
You're able to speak. You don't sound like you're intoxicated in any way or out of it in any way, generally.
Yeah.
So it's very different in that way. And because your eyes are open, partly, and partly because it's a different kind of medicine, it tends not to be particularly visual that way. Like, it's not about visions. Well, ayahuasca isn't really about visions either. It's about healing. But it obviously includes visions a lot of the time. Typically, people don't have visions in peyote ceremonies, although it's certainly possible.
Yeah, interesting.
Ken Littlefish told me one night that, or told us one night that he was in he was running that meeting as well, and he said, well, relatives, I had 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the other world last night. He said, at one point I left the teepee and I went up to the stars and saw what the kind of the cosmos or the larger universe looked like, and then I came back down and I came in through the front door of the teepee, across the fire into the chief peyote. They have something called the chief peyote, which sits on the sand altar just in front of the fire. He said, inside the chief peyote, where I saw the microcosm and saw that it was exactly the same as the macrocosm, and then back into my spot. So,
wow.
Things like that do happen.
Yeah.
But the displays tend to be more subtle in general. For me, the peyote medicine, I don't want to reduce these things, especially
Sure.
for anyone listening who may not have had that much experience, or who may have had a lot of experience and finds that, no, that doesn't, what he's saying doesn't fit my experience. But for me, the peyote medicine is very, very much about the heart.
Uh-huh.
In the end, it's all about opening the heart anyway, right?
Yeah.
But ayahuasca takes you on a pretty complex ride sometimes, where it deals with, a whole bunch of different issues. Peyote is very, very much about opening the heart, and it's really clear when you're in a peyote ceremony that if you're in your head, or if you're resisting anyway, that's the peyote is going to give you a bit of a rough ride, or maybe a very rough ride. But if you can pay attention, if you can stay centered, if you can, somebody said, watch out for head traffic. You can stay out of your head,
right.
and pay attention to what's going on, and pray, from the heart for what's going on in the ceremony. And then, as I mentioned a little earlier, later on, the prayer, or I alluded to, later on in the night, toward dawn, the prayer, you can actually focus your prayers less on the sponsor and more on your own family, friends, and yourself as well. But when you do that, you have the possibility of the peyote bringing you into reality of what Buddhists would call the awakened heart reality.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Ken looked around the meeting one morning. Some new people were in a meeting that had never been there, and he said, you people who are new here, you might wonder what this is about, what's going on here. He said, well, I can tell you. It probably won't make that much difference to you, but I'll tell you anyway. He said, what you've encountered here is reality. So what the peyote medicine does is brings you, if you're open to it, it brings you into reality. And reality, this is where it ties in for me to Buddhist teachings, is bodhicitta, awakened heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think it's a good jumping off place here in terms of understanding what these two substances, bring to the table, both individually and as kind of a collective sort of group. One of the things that I always admired about Terence McKenna was how he was really heroic with the amount of substances that he would ingest. When he would ingest mushrooms, he wouldn't just ingest a small amount. He would really, go as far and deep as he possibly could. Terence was always pushing the limits as far as he could go as a psychonaut. And one of the things that I think that many things came to Terence, but I think one of the great realizations that he had was that these substances are they're more than just spirits. They're actual beings, and not only are they beings, but they're sort of multifaceted. They're multi-dimensional gateways. They're the guardians to multi-dimensional gateways at the same time. I mean, they're this fully integrated experience into, for lack of a better term, what we would call awakening or enlightenment. And I always found that to be utterly fascinating. That what we're dealing with here is an intelligence, really, a vast intelligence. And I'm wondering if that's been sort of your experience along the way with the various medicines.
Well, I certainly won't claim to be as heroic a journeyer as Terence was. He was a great soul from that point of view, and a very brave soul as well.
Yep.
You were going to say?
Oh, no, she said, yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't call myself, that level of a heroic journeyer at all. For me, it's been more subtle in some ways. For some reason, I'm getting some feedback on the phone here. I think unless you're saying yeah a lot.
A little bit. I'll try to keep my yes to a minimum. Okay.
It sounded like I was getting an echo back on my voice here. In any case, my experience was with. The thing is, the Buddha taught. That there are teachings for every level of aspiration. I think the Buddhists like numbers. I think they said something like 49 levels of aspiration, right? So everybody's coming from a different place. Everyone has different capabilities. Everyone has different needs. Everyone learns at a different rate. McKenna was probably in the sort of top 5 percentile of heroic voyagers, I would say. There are things to be learned from these medicines at just about any level. Even very small doses of psilocybin will tend to provoke sharp insights, not spirit contact or entity contact, but certainly even small doses will get people to see things in a much sharper and deeper way than they normally do. So we should not, in my opinion, poo-poo or downplay the benefit of using these substances in small to moderate doses, which is more appropriate for a lot of people anyway.
Sure.
A lot of people, I think McKenna himself said it's a matter of how much you can stand, right? Yeah. So each person has to go there to the degree and to the level of intensity that they can deal with, and if they're really on the journey, then they might keep slowly upping that, right? Yeah. For example, with psilocybin mushrooms, you familiar with Paul Stamets?
Yes.
Yeah, he wrote the book Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. He suggests that beginners maybe start with, around 1.5 dried grams or something. McKenna talked about 5 dried grams as being what he called the committed or heroic dose, right?
Yeah.
Paul Stamets, and I would agree with that, that if people are going to work with psilocybin, ceremonial or for healing purposes or awakening purposes, starting with something around 1.5 dried grams might be useful, and then you see how that goes, and then maybe you try 2 dried grams, and then you see how that goes, and like that, because everybody's different, and everybody's metabolism is different as well,
Right.
Some people will have little effect from a large amount, and other people will have a tiny bit of it, and away they go. Did you have you interviewed Martin Ball?
No.
Oh, okay. He's written several books on these substances, he says a similar thing. That you can work with small to medium or moderate doses of psilocybin and have very powerful, very beneficial experiences. Myself, I haven't with psilocybin. I've used, worked with it a number of times. I wouldn't say that I had contact with entities in the way that McKenna has talked about it. I have certainly seen the spirits and things. There's a lot of spirits in the trees that you can see when you're in the embrace of the psilocybin medicine. I've been out in the woods and seen that kind of thing before.
I have as well. I was in the rainforest up in Washington, the Olympic rainforest, and I had an experience up there that was really kind of mind blowing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
In actually hearing the unheard music. We were hearing that music coming from the woods. I mean, there was nobody around, and we're hearing this really incredible kind of rhythmic music that was coming out of the woods.
Indeed.
And I could have sworn I saw what was, if it was not the Green Man, it was probably a close relative hanging out in the trees. It was a very interesting experience, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you probably did. I mean, it probably was whatever, you don't have to put a label on it, but it was there. And I think the point about these things, everybody, I could, ramble on about where I am on this sort of continuum. I'm in a certain place with it. Everybody's in a different place with it, as I said a few moments ago, right? And it doesn't really matter on some level. It's if you're going to work with these plants at all, you take it from where you are. And similarly with ayahuasca, the ayahuasqueros, once they get to know you, if you work with the same person, they will gradually start upping the dose on you when they feel like you're ready for it. Or you can say, I feel like I'm ready for more, right? And then you're going to hit points. Most people that I've encountered are going to hit points where it's freaky, where they have trouble handling it. This particular fellow, Ronan Niwe, he's probably, I'm guessing he's been, when he's working, he's doing 10 ayahuasca ceremonies a month or more. He's been doing this for years. He's probably done 1,000 or more ceremonies, and he said he definitely hits places that he goes, holy shit, help,
Wow.
So it's like that, right? It can be these medicines can be very intense. Ayahuasca being, a particular case in point like that. But the point is, I think, and I'm not speaking as the ultimate authority by any means here, but I think the point is that I'm an authority for myself in the sense that an artist understands what the muse is, but they may not experience that in any kind of direct visual sense, right? It's like opening yourself up to that intelligence, that voice, that energy coming through. Well, I've certainly encountered that in my own way many times with working with these plants and without the plants, for that matter, as many other people have. But I think the real point of it all is, as people have said, the universe is alive and it's talking to us, and it's trying to, Terence's brother, he likes to, Dr. Dennis McKenna, he likes to tell this story. I've heard it a few times, once in person from him at that conference that I mentioned in Iquitos, Peru. Goes something like this. He said that I think it was on an ayahuasca experience. He was, out somewhere and looking down at the earth. I think he was kind of floating around up there somewhere, and this really clear voice spoke to him and said, "You monkeys think you're in charge down there. You're not." Right? I would recommend to anybody listening to your program right now to check out Dennis McKenna. He doesn't write books particularly, but you can probably find talks by him here and there on the internet. He's a really valuable spokesman for these things, this sort of path of learning at this point. He's pardon me, I'm not sure of his exact title. He's some sort of biologist, a plant biologist of some kind, I believe.
Yeah.
But he, in his talk at the shamanic conference, he said, and I hope I'm doing him justice here because it's been a couple of years since he said this, or since I heard him say this. He said, first of all, we're starting from the point of view or the understanding that the planet is in deep doo-doo, and we don't have much time left. We have extremely little time to continue on the trajectory or the direction that we're going now as a planet, as a human community. That's the starting point. And then he said the real, how did he put it, the real voice of spirit on this planet, that's not his words, but it's the closest I can come at the moment. The true voice of spirit on this planet, the link, the liaison, the spokes, quote-unquote, people for spiritual wisdom on this planet are the plants, because they're unmediated by anything to do with human ego or distortion. They are intelligent, they are alive, they are talking to us, and many of the psychonauts will all say the same thing. Paul Stamets talks about it in part of his book on psilocybin mushrooms, that people get the same message over and over again, that we need a radical change of consciousness on this planet. We need it fast. And this is why I'm big on these plants. I don't mean to be in any way casual about it. They need to be treated extremely carefully with great responsibility and knowledge and respect and reverence for tradition and context, what Leary and the gang called set and setting. They need to be done right, but we're in a dire situation now, and we need radical methods to wake us up. It may have been McKenna that said we don't have time for 20 years of psychotherapy,
Yeah, that's right.
The plants are if you can do them right, if you're capable of handling them, if you're stable enough as a person, that's a very broad description of what stable is, because you can be a raging alcoholic and benefit deeply from these medicines. So I don't mean that stable in that way, but there are certain people that probably couldn't handle them and shouldn't work with them. But there are a great many people who can benefit from them if they're done right. And the point being that we need them. That's not the only thing we need, but it can make a huge difference to what happens on this planet if people can open up to the direct, unmediated teachings of the plants at this point.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because to me this seems really to kind of intertwine with your Dharma, which is envisioning and helping this world that we live in kind of evolve to a more conscious and awakened place. Let's talk about that for a little bit, and your experiences in these psychedelic realms, and some of the nuggets that you brought back from those places, and how you think that it can help our world, and some of the just sort of novel and refined and more complex systems that we can begin to incorporate as a result of these experiences.
Well, I think I need to answer that, to come back to some, circle back a little bit to some of the things I've alluded to already in our conversation, or in my ramblings, which is, I'll start with a comment that I referred to where Ken Littlefish said, what you've encountered here is reality. One of the reasons I'm so interested in these plants and what they're capable of, and in conjunction with spiritual practice, and we could talk more about that as well, but I think having an ongoing spiritual, just a simple mindfulness awareness meditation practice can be a very useful grounding factor for probably most people. but other versions of healing work are probably quite useful as well. The thing is, these medicines jump you into deeper places, and then you have to learn how to incorporate that into your daily walk. Just having the experience doesn't mean shit, pardon my French. You can have the most wonderful, amazing experience and go back to whatever you were doing exactly the way you were doing it before for a long time. You can be a raging ecomaniac and still have fantastic experiences with ayahuasca or psilocybin or some of these other plants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what it's really about is our daily walk, how we bring our learning into the way we move through our life, how we treat our wives and our parents and children and co-workers and where we are, are our hearts open. So what these plants do on one level, there's this whole thing about, I don't know, maybe there's two different streams almost. Terence McKenna was really interested. He was a powerful intellect, visionary. He was a philosopher, and so he was really interested in the larger picture that these plants were, communicating. I don't think that's necessary for everybody, by any means. That's sort of a minority of people. This is my opinion anyway, that a minority of people need to know that kind of information. What everybody needs to do is wake up, right? From the dream illusion of the ego, and these medicines put you in direct contact with that if you can work with them. Again, I'll refer to Ken Littlefish because he said more than once. He said, "What this medicine wants to do with you, relatives, is it wants to show you yourself, and you can make that easy or hard by how much you open to it. If you can open up to it, you can. That's it will show you. It will be a clear mirror. There's this concept in Buddhist teaching that the guru, in the traditional teachings, where you have an untainted, enlightened guru, the guru is said to be a clear mirror to the student. So that whatever you send toward the guru, you're going to get it fed right back to you, and you'll see who you are, right? Well, that's what these medicines also do, is among other things, but in particular, in peyote, definitely very much like that. It shows you yourself, and if you open up, you find out who you are is actually, something close to God, or closer to an awakened being or awakened heart being. If you resist it, then you struggle, and then it shows you that. It shows you where you are with that struggle, right? Yeah. And ayahuasca, Ronan Niwe says that a lot. He says ayahuasca is always just mirroring you. It's just showing you where you are. It'll take you as far as you're ready to go with it, but it will also tell you all the time where you're at, right? So you find out that you're a major resistor. Well, fine. That's where you are right now. You just go from there, right? But maybe I'm rambling a little here, but the point being that what the medicines do when they're at their most effective is that they cut through the bullshit, and they potentially allow you to see the truth at all levels, from the most personal inner truth to the larger truths. And that's why they're so important right now. They probably always have been important, but they're particularly important for a planet who's deeply ill.
No doubt. I think that we really need that kind of consciousness and clarity and heart opening across the board on so many levels. But I think really where we need this to take place is in the positions of leadership. If we could get some of the people who are, have their fingers on buttons and or are making, strange vaccines or putting these chemicals in our skies, we sat them down and had them have this experience. It would change their lives. They may walk away from their work at that point. This is the kind of awakening I think that we really need. We need to get those people to really examine what they're doing and look
absolutely.
at it for the sake of the planet and the long-term vision of the planet, because some of them are just, they're getting a seat at the table, for now.
Yeah.
But what about 15, 20, 30, 100 years from now? I mean, we know what they're doing impacts us for generations.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, you've just opened a massive can of worms with that one, Robert. That's a complex and extremely hard to pin down issue. Partly because some of the people who are running things, the elites in the business world and the government world, they're some of the last people that are going to want to do these things, because
That's
they have
right.
so much invested in their egos. So, getting those people to do these kind of plants and do them in the right kind of way, not an encouraging prospect, I think. I think, if you're talking about people in positions of some kind of influence, a more hopeful direction is to get people who are in the intellectual disciplines of one kind or another, in the sciences and medical field and, the universities and all that, and people who can be influential in that way. And other than that, I think we're talking about, as I say, a very complex issue, but I think we're talking about, grassroots movement here,
Yeah.
that the people, the change is not going to come from the top particularly, because the top are the people. I mean, look at the Republicans in the States. I'm in Canada, but I pay a lot of attention to this stuff, and it just breaks my heart to see what these Republicans doing. You can be glib about it, you can be angry about it, but in the end, it's really heartbreaking. You got these guys. President Obama is trying to put an end to the George Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest. Right? They're supposed to run out at the end of 2010, and he wants to let it die. And the Republicans are fighting this, and there's no logic to it. There's no rationale for it whatsoever. We're talking about tax cuts to the wealthiest. I've heard either 1 or 2%, the top 1 or 2% of income earners. Why on earth would these people need any more money? The guy working down at the corner store here, he'd be happy with an extra $2,000 a year, right? Mm-hmm. What on earth do these people need more money for? They don't need money for any more money, but they're living in this really strange place. They're holding us back in a lot of ways. I mean, we're all holding ourselves back on some level too, but these guys are holding back the kind of the agenda on some level, because they're addicted to this little thing it's not little, but this thing that requires them to have all this wealth and comfort and all these things, and they're it's, I don't know, it's the God realm, in Buddhism they have the 6 realms,
Right.
And the way it was taught to me was that the God realm is the most diluted of all the realms, because you think you've got it all, but you're actually protecting your ass all the time. It's highly conditional. You're living a total fantasy. You're living in a bubble. Yeah. David C. Corton has a book called The Great Turning, and it came out, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. It's a really interesting book. From I can't remember the subtitle. It's from Earth Empire to something that has to do with the people or something. And he refers to those people as the cloud minders. It's like they don't want to. They don't even want to acknowledge their humanness on some level. That they're part of the rest of us. They live in the clouds. They don't want their feet sullied by the dirt of the earth.
Right.
They don't want to. They're trying to keep this bubble around them, so they're not the first people that are going to want to try psychedelics, entheogens, sacred plant medicines. I
agree with you. And I think
right.
I think it's the first, really the upper 0.5%,
yeah,
upper 0.5%. I don't even think they're human, but that's a whole other story altogether.
Don't tell me you've been reading David Icke or Ike or whatever his name is.
No, this is my own experience. I Ike. It's my own. I came to this on my own. But I think that getting back to this, I think that if for these people, quote unquote, these people, right? If they have a plan and they're trying to marshal out a plan, they need foot soldiers. Okay, and it doesn't happen without foot soldiers. So I think the foot soldiers really that could benefit from the plant medicine. You know, like people on a local level, because it's the local level where this stuff gets acted out.
Yeah.
And if you've got people on a local level that are getting turned on, you know, they're going, you know what? I'm not really sure that I'm doing the right thing here by, you know, enforcing this ordinance that's come out of Washington or some other place, the UN or wherever, and they could turn their back on and say, you know what, our community is better off, you know, sort of being sustainable and small versus, you know, going down this path. I'll walk away from it. You get somebody else to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really where it needs to take place.
That's what I meant by a grassroots movement.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that level. And, you know, there's really no way to prove this, and a lot of people would disagree with me on this, and I'm sure they could make a good case for their point of view. But I feel that there is something going on. There is a journey going on where people, I think what's happening, you know, I hate to be too cliched about this, but it's almost as if there's, you know, the separation of the wheat and the chaff in some sense going on, you know, the old Christian thing. But the wheat are, or that maybe it's the chaff, pardon me, for starters, they're this elite at the top, and then there are all the people that they've duped who are absolutely resistant to any kind of change, and they're trying to hold on to some kind of an illusion. So that's what the Republicans do, is they dupe people, and they got about, you know, whatever it is, 20 to 40% of the population. You know, Bill Maher likes to say, and Jon Stewart talks about this too. So I don't get it. You know, why do these people vote for these guys? Because they're not actually they're not working for their interests at all. You know, they're working for the rich people, but you know, they've kind of fallen for this whole thing. So the rest of us, it's our job to you know, do our bit in whatever way we can. But I think it's happening in some way. You know, I think as the things separate, you know, it's very possible we're in for some really, really deep economic problems. We already are, but I think it could be getting a lot worse. Yep. And these people are going to dig their heels in even harder, the people at the top there. And as they do, the rest of the people are going to become increasingly disenfranchised. And I think there's a very distinct possibility that people will finally realize, you know, Michael Moore and others have said, the only reason I can figure out that these people vote for these Republicans is because they've fallen for this illusion of the American dream where they think they too one day could be rich. So they don't want to pick too hard on these guys because they'd like to imagine themselves as one of them, right? But one day, you know, more, you know, it's becoming increasingly clear, I think, to more and more people that ain't never going to happen. You know, that these people are not working in their interest. You know, they are the foxes in the hen house. And you know, you see this happening on different levels. You know, you see people speaking up. I don't think it's any coincidence that all these things are happening at the same time that the internet, you know, the World Wide Web is a wonderful term, you know, a metaphor, you know, for connectedness, right? Yeah. And I think there's a kind of connectedness going on that we've just barely begun to see the results of at this point.
Yeah, you know, I would agree with you, and I'd expand that even more, and I would say that this is kind of a you know, a bilateral or sort of trans party awakening, because I think that people are seeing that it's not just Republicans, but Democrats as well, who are also serving the interests of big business. All you have to do is look at Henry Waxman and his support of S510, which is the Food Safety Act, which is basically authored by Monsanto, and he's a Democrat. And, you know, so I think what people are really figuring out here, Stephen, is that it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat at this point. They're all, you know, trying to scramble for a seat at the table, and they're all being deeply, deeply vested by corporate interests. And this is the Great Awakening. and people are eschewing this sort of partisan name calling right now. And they're kind of seeing it for what it is.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Robert. I agree with you. I just pick on the Republicans because they're totally irrational.
Well, it's low-hanging fruit for sure.
Good image. Yeah.
But I think that the politics as a game is something that people are waking up from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to, in case the world ends before we get to finish our conversation or something.
Yeah.
I would like to, there's a kind of what's the word? Not pet peeve. It's an important issue for all of the coming back to the plant's role in all this.
Okay.
For me, that I haven't really addressed so far. I've alluded to it briefly a couple of times, and I would like to get that across, assuming you have some listeners. Do you have listeners, Robert?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, good. Hello, folks.
You know what, I'll tell you what, just to prove I have listeners, let me see if I can summon one and see if they can call in with a question. So
okay.
If you're out there,
well, wait, but before you do that, though, I want to get this bit in, if I may. Yeah. I think that the plants have an extremely important role to play in the years to come. In particular, ayahuasca. Mm-hmm. In a certain fashion, peyote. It's a complex issue. It's not for everybody. It's not even for most of the white or non-native people, actually. But there's a lot of native people using it. There's probably 400,000 members of the Native American Church right now. That's a lot of people in the United States. Psilocybin, a little more dubious because, as a number of people have pointed out, there's no really good container for its ritual use right now. Another potentially important one, although it's still pretty little known at the moment, is Iboga. Are you familiar with Iboga?
When you're done with this, I'll tell you about my experience with Ibogaine.
Oh, great. Yeah. I have had no experience with it. I've just read some stuff on it. And my mentor kind of fellow that I mentioned, the roadman Ken Littlefish, he told me that he had a vision, and that it's this vision that's been shared with some others. And Ken was very, very tuned in. You know, he's the one who I mentioned earlier is, on a regular communication basis with the ally spirits. He said that the vision that he's connected to is that there are three medicines which are going to play a really important role in the healing of the planet in the years to come. One is ayahuasca, one is peyote, and one is Iboga. And I actually asked him one time, I said, why not psilocybin in here, Ken? He said, because, he just put it really bluntly, he just said in one sentence, just because there's no container for it. Iboga has a tradition going back thousands of years of ritual use. Ayahuasca also, and peyote. Those three medicines have a very, very strong foundation of safe and effective and deeply understood ceremonial and healing use. Right? I'm not putting psilocybin out of the picture altogether. Ralph Metzner. I'm not sure which book it was, but I think he has a book called Teonanacatla, and maybe in that book he speaks about something he calls hybrid rituals, where you take as much as you can and create sort of these new rituals which involve or which reference and make use of the wisdom garnered through indigenous practices for many years, and try to create really good rituals out of it. I can't say how likely that is, or how strong of a direction that is, but I just put that out in terms of what Ken and others are saying about that. We've lost touch with. There is a history of powerful ceremonial use for psilocybin in Mexico and perhaps other places in the past, but unlike these other three medicines, it's been pretty much, either destroyed or pushed so far back into the mountains of Oaxaca that nobody knows much about it anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So there's nothing that you and I know of that's actually got a direct connection to a lineage of working with that medicine in a ritual way, right? Or extremely little anyway, whereas these other three medicines do. and this is where this sort of pet point that I have about these things is, which is that I think they need to be brought out and into the world and nurtured with great care. There's a real danger. I imagine you and a lot of your listeners would understand this. There's a real danger of there's a habit almost, I guess you could say, in this culture of people who know a little bit about something suddenly calling themselves experts. That's one part of it. Yeah, right? And the other part of it is people seeing where there's a dollar to be made. And with ayahuasca, I almost hesitate to say it if there's a lot of listeners out there, but there's money to be made. And, people are charging significant amounts of money to go to ayahuasca ceremonies. And as soon as you get money involved, well, I don't think I need to tell you that produces, out of the woodwork crawl people who are ready to make a quick buck, who have extremely little training. Ronan Niwe told me once, he says he thinks about 80% of the people leading ayahuasca ceremonies right now are not trained the way they should be. He is trained the way he should be. He's been trained. He goes down. He does make reasonably decent money because he's doing ceremonies all the time, but he says he's always in debt because he goes down to Peru twice a year for a month or two and works directly under Guillermo, his teacher.
Right.
And so he's going through a very traditional, rigorous training, and there's a kind of a vow, to do this right. And so there's what I'm getting at here is there's a real danger that, especially with ayahuasca right now, as it spreads fairly rapidly, that charlatans and people who are not properly trained in one way or another will get too involved in this. So I would caution anybody who's either starting to work with it, has been working with it, or is considering working with ayahuasca to really, have that banner in front of them, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, and pay close attention to who you're dealing with. Trust your intuition, trust your intelligence. Don't be hoodwinked by just the fact that somebody says they're an ayahuasca shaman or something. Anyone can call themselves a shaman. There's no authoritative body, that documents people and gives them the paper to say so. I think this is really, really important if we're going to see these things successfully move out into a larger world. That people know that it has to be done with right intention, all the way down the line. And if anyone's listening to this, or even if they aren't, if anyone knows of anybody who's doing this kind of work, in ayahuasca in particular, I would say, please, don't do it unless you're, working with a teacher and you're getting yourself really properly trained and you're doing it for the right reasons. Look into your own heart and really examine what you're doing in this, because we want this medicine and these other medicines to heal the world. And we don't want a backlash from the powers that be because people are doing it irresponsibly, or we don't want it to turn into something that, is screwed up, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
And supporting people that are deeply legitimate, I think, is crucial to this. And I think you bring up a very good point. And I know that there are some folks. I had an experience where I was involved with a group many years ago, and the teacher, he was not and I'm going to share this story because even if somebody has the psychic credentials, meaning that they've really put in the hours in terms of journeying, and it doesn't always mean they're a great person. I mean, I got involved with somebody who trained with Salvador Roquette, and through the lineage of Maria Sabina, and he was also he was an elder in the Native American Church as well, and he turned out to be kind of a scumbag, to be honest with you. And a typical sort of, guru BS. This was a psychedelic journey group, and it was a very committed community in Northern California. And he was much older and married, but nonetheless was carrying on affairs with women in the group. which I thought was incredibly disingenuous and unhealthy. Now, I got out before then because I sensed that things weren't right with him and this group. I mean, my intuition said, you know what, there's something not right here. So
exactly.
I stopped participating, and then I found out that there was this whole drama that was going on, and it all just exploded. And I got to tell you, it damaged a lot of people's lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, and also I agree with you, Robert, and if the stories about these things get out there to the public too, this is the kind of stuff that the conservative media and authorities feed off, right? Now, salvia is a good example of that right now, because it has been legal in most places, but there's no container for it. And it's actually, have you ever used it?
No, I've not.
Salvia divinorum? No. It's really powerful. One of the spokespeople in this world, a fellow named Dale Pendell, I'm fairly closely quoting him. He said, this medicine or salvia will take who you are and run away with it faster than any plant I've ever come across. It can, both through the smoking and also through the sublingual chewing method and these tinctures that you can get, which are also taken in through the oral mucosa in the mouth.
Right.
The traditional method is chewing the leaves, and then they absorb through the oral mucosa. It can, especially the smoking one, because they make these extracts. They call them enhanced extracts, right? 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. I think it's beyond that now. In a matter of seconds, literally seconds, that can take you from baseline to totally alien environment, where you don't know who you are, you don't know whether you're up or down, you don't know where you are, nothing, right? And kids are taking this stuff. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't seen any of these, but I've heard that there are YouTube videos where kids are doing things like, when I say kids, I mean teenagers,
right,
and youngish people like that, taking salvia or smoking salvia, powerful enhanced extracts, and getting in the car and stuff like that, and doing really crazy things, right?
That is crazy.
No, it's ridiculous, and again, this is where the ritual container part and the respectful. It's not respect for the sake of respect. It's respect for the sake of learning how to do these things right. And as Kat Harrison says again, to understand how they really are medicines, right? They're medicines. If you go to Daniel Siebert, Siebert, his website, sagewisdom.org, he's got a great website on salvia. And in there's an article, at least it was there the last time I looked a couple of years ago, called The Leaves of the Shepherdess by Kathleen Harrison. It's a wonderful little article that she's written about doing salvia in a ceremonial context. I think it was in Oaxaca, the state of Oaxaca somewhere in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And it was just like doing Maria Sabina doing psilocybin, or the Native American Church doing peyote ceremonies, or the shamans of the Amazon doing ayahuasca, or the people of Gabon in the Bwiti Church doing Iboga.
Right.
They had an altar. They prayed. They paid a lot of attention to paying respect and thanking the medicine and all this. And then she had this completely wonderful healing experience where a wound, this was after her breakup with Terence McKenna, and she said she'd always had a kind of a weak heart anyway, like a little bit dubious in the heart area on the physical level, and combined with what she was going through from the breakup of her marriage, she wasn't feeling too good. She was feeling pretty fragile, both physically and psychologically. And there's this wonderful little story. I'll just tell you it really briefly, since we have almost 2 hours. Well, I don't know how much time we have left now, but
we have three minutes.
Oh my gosh! Anyway, she tells a story about how she's sitting with these Mexican people, a little family. They're like, healers, and it's up in the mountains somewhere, and they're in this rough little dirt floor home, and they've got an altar, and the people are singing and praying to the medicine, and they're sitting silently and reverently. And then all of them, all 4 or 5 of them, like the husband, the wife, the couple of daughters and sons or whatever. I'm really loose with the story here. People can read it for themselves. And her, she found herself sitting in a garden, and she could see those other people there too, but they were flowers, like they were looking out of a flower or something, right? And this really large being that was way larger than them, kind of like a goddess figure, was coming around tending lovingly to the plants in the garden. And again, I'm being loose with it, but I'm giving the gist of the story.
Right.
This being came around to her, and something like she just kind of like flicked in front of Kathleen's heart, and it was something like a door opened or something, and this little black thing flew away. And basically, it was a healing, very, very effective and powerful healing for this wound in her heart, right?
That's lovely.
This is the kind of thing that these plants are capable of.
Yeah.
The peyote medicine is capable of healing just about anything. Ken Littlefish has talked about this in these ceremonies a number of times. I'll tell you another little story if I may ramble a bit longer.
Sure.
Shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. One night we had a meeting where there was a woman who was quite physically ill. She'd had an operation that had gone really wrong. Things had gotten infected. She had some kind of a bag, she was wearing that was draining off, pus and things like this on her. She was in bad shape. She'd never been to a meeting before, Native woman. Somebody had kind of come upon her and taken her under their wing and brought her along to one of these meetings. Normally you're supposed to sit upright and pay attention all night, but because of her condition, they allowed her to lie down, and she was in a lot of pain. She was right behind me, and she was crying a lot of the time, and she was clearly in a lot of pain. And she was in so much pain that they eventually decided to take her to the hospital before the meeting was even over. These meetings go on till about 9 or 10 in the morning. They go all night from about 12 hours or so. Anyway, after the woman was gone, Ken wasn't running that meeting. He said, well, normally if this was my meeting, I might have done things differently. But because it's not my meeting, I'll just tell you how I feel about what's going on here. And he says, I don't say this judgmentally, relatives. I'm just telling you what's possible. He said, if we had wanted to, we could have healed that woman. And this is where, and this is one of the reasons I'm so heart devoted to the Native American Church and what it can do. It's about uniting our hearts in prayer for a particular purpose. Mm-hmm. And the idea being that if everybody can get out of their heads and into the same space, and this is where the medicine comes in, with the help of the medicine and the medicine spirits, the physical world, to quote Philip K. Dick. Nice one, Steve.
That was good.
Yeah, I like that one too, actually. Yeah, I'm getting a little carried away, obviously. Anyway, to quote Philip K. Dick, matter is plastic in the face of mind. Mm-hmm. Matter is plastic in the face of mind.
And you would know.
Yeah, he probably would know, actually. Yeah. So Ken said, we could have healed that woman. He said, I have been doing this for 40 years, he said, and you wouldn't believe the things I've seen in this teepee. He said, and I'm not kidding you, relatives. He said, I've seen people come in here. He said, I've seen a guy come in here with a broken leg and walk out in the morning.
Wow.
But what it takes to do that is it takes everybody in that meeting to be out of their head, out of their own agenda, out of their ego, and totally concentrated on one purpose with their heart and with the assistance of the medicine, right?
Yeah.
So that's what these medicines can really do. They can heal, and they can heal just about anything. And ayahuasca can do that, and Iboga can do that, mm-hmm. And I imagine Salvia divinorum can do that as well.
Yeah. Wow. I had an experience with not Iboga, which is the leaf, but Ibogaine, which is the synthesized version of it.
Right, I'm aware of it. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah, it came to me back in 1995, and I was at that time, the psychedelic community in the Bay Area was pretty strong. I mean, Terrence was still alive. He was doing a lot of events around the Bay Area, and Mondo 2000 was sort of still happening. And so there was a lot of psychedelic literature and a lot of psychedelic momentum. And so I was very drawn to that community and that world, particularly through the music. And my neighbor downstairs was also kind of floating around in this world. And I lived in an apartment building in Oakland, and it was on the basically the fringe of the eastern part of Oakland, which is primarily black. And so I was the manager of this apartment building, and I would say that 90% of my tenants were black. So I was really engaged in a relationship with the African American community for about 4 years in a very intense way. Finding them places to live and collecting their rent and the whole 9 yards. So I was really into that world. And so, but the one woman who was not African American lived downstairs, and she had some Ibogaine, and she wanted to know if I wanted to try some. And I said, "Oh yeah, sure, lay it on me." And I had really no idea what I was getting into, only that I needed to be clear, and I didn't, and not have any MAO inhibitors in my system. So I fasted for a good 24 hours, cleaned up my system, and then I took it one night, and I had no idea what I was getting into. And I was there in my apartment, and within 10 minutes, the lamps and the stereo and everything else in my room started to sort of move in these spirals. But that was within 10 minutes, and I said to myself, if this is the first 10 minutes, then I am in for a ride. And I was, and for the first hour and a half or so, it was pure ego death. And at one point, I actually felt fairly early on, actually, this presence, this alien presence, actually viewing through me as I was the camera, and I felt this alien mind actually merging with my mind and viewing my experience through me. And it was one of these pivot moments where if I had stayed there and really focused on that, I probably could have gone mad. But what I did is I, for lack of a better term, I summoned my elders or people that could help me. And sure enough, I felt this wall of support just come in between me and that experience. It was really kind of remarkable. And for the entirety of that journey, I got deeply, for lack of a better term, educated on the plant. The plant was speaking to me through just about every way that it could, through formations on my carpet, breathing through the walls of my apartment. I mean, it was really remarkable because at about, I don't know, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, I went downstairs to talk to my friend. I'm like, what is going on here? And so she handed me the literature, and by this time I'd had a number of unique experiences with shapes and a lot of things that were really just coming through, breathing through my reality. And as I flipped through the literature, which was a series of mimeographed or Xerox pieces of paper, I could see the images on the paper that I'd seen in my apartment. So what was happening is that the plant was really speaking to me through every available means in that apartment. And it was actually it was remarkable. And when I came through on the other side of it, which was at about 9 o'clock the next morning, I felt like I had a complete reset in my consciousness. And the sort of invisible wall that we erect to sort of protect us from psychic influences, the membrane that we developed, that was gone. It was all gone.
Mm-hmm.
I had no membrane whatsoever. I felt like a child, and that's a good thing, and it's a challenging thing.
Yeah.
Because I had to really put my boundaries back up again, but it took me probably a good 6 months to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not a casual experience at all.
No.
It's deeply life-changing, and I think it has immense promise.
Absolutely. Well, you know, in the Bwiti religion, and I read a number of stuff on the internet, but I'm getting a lot of my information from a book called Iboga, the Root of African Shamanism, I think is the subtitle, by several authors. The first one is Vincent Ravalac, Ravalec, I think is the spelling. And in the Bwiti religion, they only ever take a large dose of it once in their whole life as an initiation. But it's like a 3-week journey, you know, like the thing that you did. And this actually argues for, in my way of seeing things, your experience there actually argues for the careful negotiation of ritual context and knowledge and education and proper set and setting for these things, because somebody may be a little more fragile than you perhaps might have gone mad, you know, or done something really dangerous to himself or other people. Whereas if you're you're in a controlled environment, first of all, you are in a controlled environment. You're with people that know what they're doing. They know what to do when you get into a space like that. They know how to call. They're working with their, if they're doing this right, if they're legitimate people, they're in contact with the healers, the spirits, and the spirits are coming in and helping them with that, with people, in those kinds of difficulties, right?
Yeah.
So for them, it's kind of a one-shot thing. They do it in sort of small kind of subliminal doses when they support other people's initiations and do other kinds of ceremonies throughout their life. But they really just have the big one once, according to Vincent Ravalac and al.
Well, apparently, I have my big one.
yeah. Well, Ibogaine too. I mean, I'm talking about the root in itself is the way they do it in Gabon and surroundings. But Ibogaine, are you familiar with Howard Lotsoff?
Yeah, in fact, that's where I got into Ibogaine, was through the work of Lotsoff, and particularly his clinic, which at one time was in Amsterdam, and then he moved it down into Central America, and I don't know where he is now, but I thought it was very encouraging in terms of how they were dealing with addiction with Ibogaine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about the possibilities of Iboga or I don't know how to pronounce it, Iboga. I would think it would be Iboga actually, but and Ibogaine or Ibogaine for dealing with addiction. And Ayahuasca and peyote are also very powerful medicines for the same things. And a lot of it has to do with this thing that we were talking about earlier, which is that they show you yourself. In the book, they and also in some of the internet accounts that I've read. There's a commonality to the experience with Iboga. But several testimonials where people said it's like literally like a movie screen is brought down, like somebody pulls a string and brings a movie screen down in front of you, and you actually see the places in your early childhood or whatever where you turned away from life. We're talking about addicts here in particular, right? It shows you that place, sometimes in like visual detail, where you were in your family or something, and the moments where you were being sort of brutalized by the ignorance of the world around you in whatever fashion or at whatever level, and you turned away, you turned inward, you absorbed the wound, you took the knife and you stuck it in yourself, so to speak, and then became unconscious of that happening. And that led to the addictive pattern later on. It shows you all that stuff. And the other remarkable thing about both the root and Ibogaine, from what I've read in this regard, is that At the same time, it literally, physically, biologically knocks out the addictive gene or whatever that is, cells in your brain or something, for a period of up to perhaps, I don't know, 4 to 8 weeks or something.
Yeah, I experienced that, by the way. I had no desire to have anything stronger than a cup of tea.
Yeah, Lotsoff talked about that because he was in the early stages of a heroin addiction when he had an experience kind of roughly like yours, where it's like, oh sure, I'll take that, right?
Yeah.
And he said, after 23 hours of being run through the ringer, he had this really sharp moment where it was just made really clear to him that he had a choice between a path toward death and a path toward life, and that at that moment he was choosing death, and he decided he wanted life, and so he made that choice to stop using the heroin, and this remarkable medicine gave him the blessing of not having the craving for a long enough time to get him out of it.
Yeah.
With Ibogaine therapy, they say that it's extremely important to have a context of therapy for that period of time. You have this window when, as one person put it, you can reclaim the art of living. But if you don't get the help to break the old patterns and get out of your perhaps even physical circumstances that you were in before, there's a very good chance you're just going to go back to it eventually.
Well, it saved my life. I will say that, because while I was not addicted to heroin, I was going through a very challenging time in my life, and there were other substances at play in my life, and the Ibogaine put that on hold for me, and it hit a reset button both in my brain because it actually goes in there and zaps a part of your brain that is addictive. I mean, it just knocks it out.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And so once that was out, and then I had this whole feeling of my for lack of a better term, my psychic membrane was just down. I had to re-engage myself with reality, and I had to choose my friends really well. I had to choose where I was going really well. I couldn't put myself into places that were heavy because I was really vulnerable, and over time I was able to put that membrane back up, but it was different than the one I had before. And I think it's a remarkable substance, and it's an absolute crime that it's not available to people throughout the world to really get through their addiction in a very, almost a quantum fashion.
It might be the best treatment for addiction on the planet, actually.
Yeah, I agree with
that. It might be, yeah.
So let's talk about your book. It comes out in November. And what are some of the things that you have planned for the release of the book? Do you have any parties, book tour? What's going on with that?
Well, thank you for asking that. I'm just sort of doing it bit by bit. That's contacting people like yourself and trying to make develop a network and connections with people and so on. I haven't organized any particular kind of book tour at this point. I intend to make some contact with bookstores down perhaps the west coast of the United States, and maybe do a driving tour at some point, maybe in the new year.
Right.
Not 100% sure how that's going to go, because I'm also slated tentatively for a hip replacement sometime in the new year as well. So I might be a little bit limited in my mobility for a while. But like that, I'm having a book launch here in Vancouver in late November. I'm actually going to have Ken Littlefish is going to come up and be a guest speaker at it, as well as myself talking about the book and such like as well. So that's, I don't know, how that will work out at the moment, but I'm looking forward to that. I've done some articles. I've had an article, a long article in Shaman's Drum magazine called Walking with Grandfather Peyote and Other Sacred Medicines. Had an article in Sacred Hoop on similar theme. I think it's called Heart of the Great Spirit. And another one in Reality Sandwich last fall called When Prayer Meets Medicine. And a couple of other ones, one called something called Alternatives magazine. a few little things here and there like that, and just developing links, on Facebook and collecting a mailing list, and looking for people who will review it, and the usual things that any budding author has to do that way. This is my first book, so I'm just learning these things on the fly, so to speak.
Right. Well, you're doing a good job, and I'm glad you reached out and picked up on the thread that I started with Dale a few weeks back. So that's really cool. Well, one of the things that's certainly...
Oh, that's right. You did talk to Dale, right? I mentioned him earlier.
Yeah. And one of the things you could do is you'll be able to use this podcast. This will be a podcast now. Once we're done with this, and you can actually grab this as an MP3 file, and you can put this up on your own website. So you'd be happy to go forward and use it. Do you know Kenneth Newby by any chance?
No, I do not.
Kenneth teaches up there at Simon Fraser, and he's he's a great musician, and he's an explorer in the realms that you and I are talking about. And I think Kenneth would be somebody that would be a really cool person for you to connect with from an intellectual perspective and also from a musical perspective. I mean, you're also a musician, am I right?
Yeah, excuse me, I'm not actually doing a huge amount of it right now. For about 10 years, I was making CDs, sort of. I was trying to make something that was a legal high, sort of, somewhat meditative, but also somewhat journeying-oriented music. The artist name on that music, in case anyone's interested in checking it out, is Keary, Keary. And the website for that is a separate website, Keary-Reedsong, REEDSONG.com. There's samples on there of the music and so on.
Cool.
And I've also taught a lot of music over the years as well to kids and such like. Sure. Do you have can you possibly send me an email address for Kenneth?
Yeah, I can. I'll send you a contact, Kenneth, and his first solo CD is called Ecology of Souls, which comes from McKenna, obviously.
And
so that'll tell you a little bit about Kenneth. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let me give out the number here in case anybody wants to ask you a question. The show number is area code 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask Stephen, or you'd like to chime in and share perhaps an experience that you've had in the sacred plant world, we've got a few minutes left, and maybe we can take one or two calls at the most. In terms of where you're taking the book, do you see yourself as this being sort of a foray into more publishing? Do you want to write more books, or you just want to see how this goes, or where the plans take you, or what's your goals around getting more information out in the world?
Yeah. What I'm trying to do, I guess, in the largest sense, is pay attention. I care about the planet, and it's like my child almost. There was a woman who had a book once called "If You Love This Planet," right? I care about where we're going. It breaks my heart to see what's happening on the planet these days. I think we're in for perhaps much more extreme conditions in the near future. Yeah. I'm just trying to do whatever I'm capable of doing in my own little way to add my voice to what I consider to be a very hopeful and authentic vision, which doesn't come from me, of course, but which I've had the extreme good fortune of kind of hooking up with, which is that there is another way to live on this planet. There is such a thing as awakened heart. It's real. We're all capable of waking up to that, and we're all capable of reconnecting to a genuine way of living on this planet. What that will look like, I don't know. We could have 5,000 years of living in little communities, off the grid, or there may be no grid. Who knows?
Right.
But I believe in the in the potential of humanity, in spite of what we see around us a lot of the time now. And I'm just trying to do my little piece to be a spokesperson for that. I like to write. I feel that I have some ability to communicate in that way, and that's my prayer, that's my intention, to try to help us in whatever little way I can to hook up back to who we really are and hook up to, the reality of the fact that we're living in, I think it was Richard Bosch who wrote a great book called Dark Night, Early Dawn, I think is the name of the book. Wonderful book. An ensouled cosmos. To begin to recognize that we are part of the web, that we're connected to the planet, the living spirit of the planet. And McKenna talks about that a lot, of course, too, as do many others. So that's my intention. Where it takes me, I don't know. I'm thinking of even perhaps writing, doing a book with Ken Littlefish about his life. He's had a most remarkable life, and using it as a sort of a way to for him to speak about some of the teachings that he might have to share with the world, and just tell his story. Thought about doing that. Other than that, I don't have any specific plans for a second book at this point.
Right. Well, let's give people your website. Tell them where they can find out more about you.
Sure. Thank you very much for asking. It's www. Stephen with a PH, STEPHEN, Gray, all one word, of course, Stephen Gray, GRAY, vision.com, StephenGrayVision.com. And there I have by the way, as well as some of my own writings that are not in the book, and some small excerpts from the book, of, I think, what would be a very instructive interview, both as an audio, in an audio version, and in the text form, of an interview with this fellow, if people have been listening for very long, that I mentioned earlier, Ronan Niwe, one of the neo-shamans, non-native shamans, who's being trained really well and has his head and heart in the right place in bringing this medicine forward into the world. I interviewed him, and he has some excellent things to say about how people can approach working with ayahuasca.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's StephenGrayVision.com, and the book, one more time, is Return.
It's called Returning to Sacred World, and the subtitle is A Spiritual Toolkit for the Emerging Reality. Just in extremely brief terms, it's more or less three kind of sections to the book. The first one kind of talks about some of these larger issues, how we got to where we are spiritually, and in the situation on the planet. What some of the things we may need to reconnect to move forward. Some of the teachings that I've gathered, winnowed out of my experience of 40 years on the path, from both Buddhism and some of the indigenous shamanic type teachings. And the last third of the book or so goes into some detail, providing almost like a primer, a resource, trying to put into perspective, in particular, three of the major entheogens, or sacred plant medicines. And I spoke particularly about the ones that I've had experience with, so that would be peyote, ayahuasca, and psilocybin, even though it didn't make Ken Littlefish's little triumvirate of the three. I didn't speak, I just mentioned in a paragraph or two Iboga, because I've had no experience directly with it myself. And, even the humble little plant cannabis fits into the category that if you use it right, and that's a huge word with cannabis for sure, it has potential,
Well, it's certainly helping a friend of mine who has had a very challenging relationship with alcohol, and he's moved over to partaking of cannabis, and I will say that his life's improved dramatically. Yeah,
I personally don't recommend it for people who have had addictive issues, because it can just be a replacement, and maybe it's like going from heroin to methadone. Maybe it's a stepping stone. I can't say for sure.
I think it is for him, and trust me, it is certainly, in this case, the lesser of far two evils.
Yeah, I imagine it probably would be. But when it's used carefully, if it's used for medicinal reasons, I don't see why people can't use it. People use it. They don't necessarily use it to get stoned. If you just have one little toke every few hours when you're using it to stimulate your appetite, if you're HIV positive or something, can be fantastic for that sort of thing. But if you're using it for psychoactive purposes or sort of ritual healing, awakening purposes, I think it should be used, somewhat sparingly and as much as possible with really right intention.
I agree with that. I think it's more powerful than people understand, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely. If you sit alone, try, not speaking to you particularly, you may have done this. If you sit alone in a room and meditate and pray for a while and then take some cannabis and stay alone and try to stay out of your head and just meditate and pray, or, maybe listen to some really kind of spacious kind of music or something like that, that you'll see, how much more powerful the plant is than if you're just sort of smoking with friends and, moving around and yakking and all that stuff, right?
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
All right.
No calls?
There's my prompt. It's time for us to say goodnight.
Hey, well, thanks a lot for speaking with me, Robert. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. I hope it was useful for you and whoever happened to be listening this evening.
Yeah, I think it's pretty popular. I actually got three. We're on the air. 3 people marked the show as a favorite, so that's a good thing. So I think we're on the right track here. Well, take care of yourself, Stephen, and we'll catch you down the road sometime. Once the book comes out, we'll check back in and see how things are going. Okay?
Yeah, excellent. Keep in touch, Robert.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Take care now.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stephen Gray, what a lovely man, and what a great conversation we just had with him for the last 2 hours. I'm about to run out of time here. My dime is almost over on the Blog Talk server. My name is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to Far Sunday, and you know the mantra: use your head to discern what's real, and use your heart to open to what's possible. I'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll see you tomorrow morning if I can do it. I've got technical issues. Have a great Sunday night.